Okay, so we are going to look at uh, chapter 6 and discuss culture and personality. So the objectives, the first page I erased because it was an icebreaker, but the objectives I want you to look for in this chapter is specifically learning about a personality in the sense of the five factor model, which is the FFM. Uh, they're pointing out the highlights where they're talking about cross-cultural aspects in looking at Asian uh, as far as China and the Philippines. You're also going to be discussing and looking at cross-cultural research in terms of the personality dimensions uh, as well as the traits, looking into control, dominance, as well as autonomy. Additionally, my hope is that we'll talk a little bit about the indigenous personalities and how it's conceptualized in terms of personality and how we might look at that. Also, talk about universal biologically innate traits as how they would coexist within indigenous aspects of personality and looking at integrated frameworks of personality. So let's start with defining personality. So when I talk about personality, I'm referring to how it endures the characteristics and the behavior that would comprise a person's unique adjustment to their way of life. Here I'm talking about major traits, interests, drives, values, one self concept that we've been talking about, our abilities as well as emotional patterns. There's going to be various theories that would explain the structure as well as the development of personality in different ways. However, they all agree that personality would help to determine how we behave. So, when we're talking about the field of personality psychology, we're talking about the study and within the nature and definition of personality, as that being the part of development structure that would include constructs, dynamic processes, the variations, specifically speaking, how we endure and live with individual differences, as well as look at maladaptive forms. Now, when we talk about traits, this is enduring personality characteristic that's enriched that allows us to help to describe and determine our behavior across different situations. Additionally, we look at identity, and that's an individual sense of self that would be set with physical, psychological, as well as interpersonal characteristics that's not going to be wholly shared with any other person, as well as a range of the affiliations, like our ethnicity, for example, or our social roles. Identity is going to involve continuity as well as looking at the feelings of how a person might be today or the differences they were yesterday. So, more or less, it's a sense of how one would take in our own body sensation, our body image, for example, how we might see our memories, our goals, our expectations, as well as the beliefs of ourself. You could think of it also as our personal identity. So just to recap, when you're looking at the slide here, it's saying how personality is pretty much, layman terms, aspects of our individual uniqueness. And it's those enduring behavioral and cognitive characteristics, traits, and predispositions that help make us who we are. Again, trait is going to be the characteristic or the quality that helps to distinguish who we are. And then again, identity perceives or the perception of our roles within life, our experiences, as well as uh, narratives, values, and motives that we will incorporate within our life experience. Let's delve into perspectives. So, when we're talking about psychological anthropology, we're talking about the study of human beings. Typically, it's involving how we describe and explain the similarity and differences amongst the different human groups. in terms of our language, aesthetic expressions, our belief systems, as well as social structures over the range of geography and chronology. Now, there's also physical anthropology, where that focuses more on the origin, evolution, and environmental adaptation of human groups, whereas social cultural anthropology would look at more about the development as well as functioning of our customs, beliefs, and the institutions that we incorporate within our social situations. Now, in terms of when we're talking about the basis of national character, here we're looking at how the general personality characteristics would be attributed to the people of a nation. So, although culture has been recognized as, to affect on character formation, the idea really of national character is not generally considered as useful a construct as it is invariably consisting more of unexamined stereotypes that have been associated with a particular culture or group. When we talk about cross-cultural perspectives, our focus would be on the traits as well as taking time to look at personality more discreetly and separate from the culture that it's within. It would be more of looking at it in terms of ethic or emic approaches, um, which would be or universal. So culture and personality seen combined can be interdependent, which as you recall is considered to be a collectivistic point of view. When we're talking about indigenous personalities, constellations of personality traits as well as our characteristics will be found specifically in one culture. Uh, so those conceptualizations of personality pretty much will develop in a particular culture, and it's going to be specific and relevant only to that culture. An example being if we talk about the African American culture, a component of our existence here in America would be that of being our ancestors survived living through slavery and us being the survivors of such. That's a specific realm in terms of how we are recognized. Not that we were the only slaves, but in America, considerably speaking, the majority of slaves were black, were African. So be that as it may, um, we can take it in looking at it in that aspect. And when we're talking about the cultural indigenous perspectives, again, you're viewing the culture and the personality and you're combining these entities um, and looking at it in that construct. Well, let's talk about the measuring personality across cultures. When we talk about ethic perspectives, we're talking about the approach of how we study human cultures based on one's concept or constructs that's going to be held to be more universal and applicable cross culturally, being able to compare it to different cultures. Here, it's an approach that's generally going to be more for ethnology rather than ethnographic. So this term sometimes is used critically in terms of studies and perspectives that would help to aspire objectivity, but really succeed only in defining social behaviors in terms of the researcher's own cultural value system. So think of it like this as you being an outsider looking into a culture that you do not specifically belong to. And then there's going to be a consideration about those patterns of behaviors that's going to be within the culture being universal. Now, in terms of EMIC, here it's denoting an approach in terms of studying human culture that would interpret those behaviors and practices in terms of more of a system of meanings that's created by and operated within a particular cultural context. As such, this approach generally would be more the kind of that's going to be associated with that ethnography as rather than the ethnology. An example here would be that you're delving specifically into your own culture to see the uniqueness of your culture, if that makes sense. When we speak about the universality of the five factor model, know that it's coming from similarities in personality dimensions within and between cultures. Support came from developing and looking at the excuse me, factor analysis of trait adjectives that was developed within an English lexicon that pretty much helped to describe self as well as others. Now, we have what we call the NEO um, personality inventory, or what they're up to now is the NEOPI revised. This is a standard questionnaire that helps to measure the five factor model. What it does is provide a systematic assessment of the emotional, the interpersonal, the experiential, the attitudinal, as well as the motivational styles of a person. It's a detailed personality description which can be a valuable source um, for when somebody's hiring or just trying to develop and understand one's personality. Now, again, what it's doing is measuring all five dimensions of the personality, that being agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, extroversion, as well as openness to experience. Generally speaking, it's a 240 item questionnaire and is usually administered to clients who would be the age of 17 and older. That's the adult model that we're speaking about. Really quickly, I just want to go over some of the traits that's associated with the factor model. When we talk about neuroticism, here we're looking at anxiety, when a person might be angry or hostile, depression, self consciousness, impulsiveness, as well as vulnerability. Uh, Under extroversion, we're talking about warmth, gregariousness, or feeling great and happy, assertiveness, activity, excitement seeking, positive emotions. Openness would cover fantasy, aesthetics, feelings, actions, ideas, as well as values. Agreeableness, here the traits would be more in line with trust, straightforwardness, altruistic, compliancy, modesty, and tender mindedness. And then there's conscientiousness. Those traits would look at competence, order, dutifulness, achievement striving, as well as self discipline and deliberation. Right, so cross culturally speaking, the differences when we're talking about aggregating the different levels of the five factor model, we're looking at cultural differences in terms of how we take those numbers and levels of the different traits and how it'll help us to kind of raise the different questions about why differences exist. There's two hypotheses involved. That would be where we're looking at personalities in terms of how they're constructed because of the culture we're from. And then there's also the hypothesis looking at how groups of individuals with a higher mean level of neuroticism might come together uh, or are migrated into a certain geographic region, which would be termed more as being selective migration. And then we have what we call reverse causality or reverse causation. And what I'm talking about in this sense is more about how it's a common error of us mistaking the cause for the effect and vice versa. So the question here is we ask whether an event or a condition should be considered to be the cause of a phenomenon, which might be in reality its effects. That can be a useful check against our preconceptions and kind of generate fresh, challenging ideas. An example you could think of for this would be how poverty for me, say, for example, might be seen as an effect of my financial irresponsibility. But what if it's just been presumed that it's irresponsibility when in fact it's because of the effect of being in that social class in the first place that makes me be seen as poor? So when we're talking about this, you're considering a reverse causality because more or less the useful strategy for dealing with this correlational data would be to just try to flip the script, so to speak. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about perceptions of national character and looking at how we crunch those numbers when we're talking about personality traits. Again, the perceptions of natural characters is where they're looking at stereotypes about personalities of people of different cultures. I'm going to apologize in advance because my puppy, who has big dog energy, is about to probably start barking on us. Let's hope he holds off. However, know that the beliefs about distinctive personality characteristics is really common to members of a culture, and it's referred to again national character, or you could think of national stereotypes if that is helpful. If you say it as national stereotypes, know that it includes beliefs about our social, physical, as well as mental characteristics. But the present article or present situation really looks at the personality traits. So there's going to be several different factors that we know influence our belief systems. It could be generalizations that's based on observations of one's personality traits of individual culture members. It can be where there's an inference made from a national ethos that would reveal the socioeconomic conditions, one's history, one's customs, the myths, legends, and value systems that's created. It can be shaped by comparison and contrasting with geographically close or competing cultures. Stereotypes are those oversimplified judgments. So when we see them, it has a little bit of truth, but know that the national characters this being reflected generally have average emotional, interpersonal, experiential, attitudinal, as well as motivational styles, members of the culture. What do I mean by that? It means, like I mentioned, stereotypes do it's generated from one line of truth. I think I used I don't know if it was this class or my other class, where I used the stereotype about how all African Americans love fried chicken. And that's not really the case. However, you do have some, like myself, who love fried chicken. But because some may enjoy fried chicken, it became generalized that all black people love fried chicken, which we know is not the true case. So when we're talking in all this, understand that we have to look at the functioning, which is how it's maintained in terms of our national identity. Then we have to also look at the source of where this national character or the national stereotypes are generated, how it's within the climate of our social being, how it's national wealth or a global situation, how everybody else sees us, and then there's again our value system and our social desirability to belong, and how some may say we should and some may say we don't. All right, I am actually going to stop here. However, please do make sure you read the entire chapter. There's still a plethora of information you're going to want to know and understand. Again, take time to write down any questions you might have if you don't understand something and bring them into class next week. Um, However, again, I just want to make sure you had some of the definitions down pat and have an understanding of how it plays out. I will be putting into Canvas some key terms for you to work with, so you'll have that along with this video lecture. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.